Let's dive into Utkatasana chair pose. So this is one of my favorite poses of the practice right now to build heat and generate a lot of strength and stability in the lower part of the body. So to begin is foot placement. Foot placement can really be however you wish, as long as the bones of the legs are pointing neutral and forward. So for most people's skeletons, that second toe aligning with center ankle, center knee, and hip bone. I'm actually going to take the big toes together, slight space between the heels. Now, as we approach chair pose, I want to find what a neutral package in the pelvis is like. So first is that the natural curve of the low back actually presses forward to the front of the body. And the core should be hugging backward to that low back. So it's almost like a package, as if your low back is pressing forward, your belly is rooting back and up through the rib cage. And none of this is compromising your ability to breathe full and low in these areas. So we want to find whatever muscular support we need to make that true. Now I'm just going to keep my hands kind of on this package of this lower part of the body, as my body kind of tends to disintegrate when I transition and make different movements. And so I'm going to just start to lift my toes. And one of the things is that as we slide down, we're going to want to try to take the weight more back into the heels. When the weight is back into the heels, it lets your butt stick out more. When your weight is forward into the fronts of the feet, it makes your butt scoop forward more. And chair pose is all about getting the butt back. So that means that we need to take the weight back into the heels. So let me gather my neutral pelvic package right here. I'm going to take the toes up off the ground, lift and spread them. And then as I start to bend into my knees, I'm going to take the weight back into my heels and try to keep this package working the same way. My heart is in the same relationship as my pelvis. So as my pelvis goes back, my butt goes back, my heart goes more forward. Now I want to use my legs here. Chair pose, if we do it precisely, will teach us how to get up from chairs in our everyday life in a way that doesn't overstress the knees. And the way that we don't overstress the knees is we make sure that the legs are doing the work that is required of them. We turn on the muscles on top of the thigh bones, underneath the thigh bones, and deep in the gluteal area. As we sit down, my emphasis is more on hip flexion. So my emphasis is more on closing this joint than it is on closing this joint. When you take the knee joint, is what I meant by this joint, when you take the weight more forward into the toes, notice that all of a sudden the emphasis goes more to closing the knee joint than it does to closing the hip joint. There's a bigger angle in the hip joint all of a sudden. When I take the weight back into my heels, my knees are allowed to soften a little bit. The flexion of the hips is emphasized as I go back. Now, rooting down through the feet, it's a pushing action there. And then the thighs are responsible for holding the pelvis back here. When they hold the pelvis down and back as if a giant had their hand on your pelvis and pulling you down as if into a big chair behind you, then all of a sudden your torso becomes so much more self-sufficient. You should feel that your side waist can lengthen out to the armpits, sliding down sideways out to the armpits. And then you take your arm variation of choice. When you're ready to come out, I just like to scoop the butt upward and let the legs rest. And then it's nice to go in and out, transition in and out of the pose. A lot of times this pose we take for a breath or a couple of breaths. Because we do it so often, it can be taught less and less and less. So it's very possible that you can get to a point where you've done 200 chairs and you're still not quite certain why sometimes your chairs feel really awesome and really liberating for you, and why sometimes the chair pose feels a little bit more constricted, constrained, and makes you really angry. So as we go in and out, you want to just try to see, take your attention and marry it to the form that you're trying to not change. What am I trying to not change here? The pelvis relationship all the way out through the skull. As I stand here, I take my attention, I marry it to that whole part of my body, and then lifting the toes, sliding the pelvis back, and trying to maintain all of those relationships, using the legs, using the muscles of the legs. And then when that happens, the torso stretches out self-sufficiently. And then you come up and you just try to watch the transition there as well. So that's Utkatasana chair pose with a couple of the major things that show up in my practice and the practices of other people's that I watch all the time, and just trying to make us feel a little bit more powerful and in charge in the chair. Happy practicing. Namaste.